the ability to sit down as farmers and really plan effectively those stories and make sure that we're telling them in the right way, that we're doing it proactively rather than reactively. Because I think often at times in the ag sector, we wait for a moment of hesitation and a moment of when things aren't going so right. I'm like, oh yeah, we've got all these stories. Actually, let's tell you the good news story. Where I think actually we've got those all along. We just need to start telling them proactively and positively from the start.
Welcome back to another episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's guest is Josh Gilbert from Newcastle in Australia. Josh is a Worimi man, a farmer, an academic, and a good mate of mine from the Create program. In today's episode, we cover off his roots, his passion for Indigenous agriculture, the book he's currently writing, and his experience so far on the Create program. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Hey Josh, how are you going today?
I'm good, thanks mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you please introduce yourself and share a bit about your background?
Yeah, I can. Thanks, mate. And thanks for having me on. Yeah, so I'm Josh Gilbert. I'm a Worimi Aboriginal man from the mid-north coast of New South Wales in Australia. I guess to connect people with this landscape, we go from almost Newcastle in the south, which is about an hour and a half from where I am now. We go up to a place called Taree in the north, which is about another half an hour from where I am in the north, and out to the Barrington Tops, which is about an hour and a half. So quite a big kind of landscape here. Definitely not the biggest nation or tribe, but it's quite a big place. We know my family have been here for at least 60,000 years, and my dad's ancestors have the first recorded birth in the cave in the mountains not too far behind me. So this place is definitely home for me and where my people have been forever. Our story is probably quite well recorded in some senses in terms of our Indigenous families. So our Worimi people here clashed with Western agriculture, the Australian Agricultural Company, which is one of the biggest ag companies still in Australia today, clashed here 200 years ago in a place not too far from here. And through that tension and relationship building, I guess, married in after getting permission from the federal government at the time, but married into the company. Really, my dad's Aboriginal family married into one of the shepherds at that time and started farming sheep on this country. And this country is definitely not sheep country, and I think they learned quite a bit through those original 20, 30 years. But because of that relationship, I think our family history in terms of that relationship was quite well known. So I guess fast forward 200 years, our family have been kicking around the same landscape for that long in terms of Western agricultural production, from those early sheep days to beef cattle, and also some dairy in relationship with some other stuff as well, and then have really kind of formed a path now where still beef cattle farming, probably not to the size and scale as well I would hope and what my aspirations are, but certainly still involved in the industry and have that passion and tie to agriculture for a long period of time. So it's a bit about my family. I guess where I'm now, I work at UTS at the university doing Indigenous employment research, so looking at Indigenous employment across every industry in Australia. Haven't really dived into the agricultural world yet, and looking forward to that at some stage. Also doing a PhD on Indigenous agriculture post-colonisation. So what's that relationship been since almost 200 years ago, a bit more, in the Western agricultural sector, and then writing a book around a similar topic, narrating our family story through that, and then sit on a range of different boards from everything from small scale, a small cattle event that we run, we get 500 school kids through that every year, to an organisation that's got about $4 billion on the books and provides housing. So kind of very vast scale through that, and about 10 different boards throughout that financial continuum, I guess.
That's awesome. So you cover quite a few sectors, and you obviously are passionate about the agricultural side of things as well. What's led you to have such a passion on that?
I think the connection to landscape, if I'm honest. So I grew up off country for about 10 years. We moved back when I was starting high school, or a little bit before then, and found that the landscape was really important to me, but actually I wanted to be a lawyer. Like that was the passion project. My dad had an accident when I was younger, and I had this sense that like justice had never happened. He got hit, and the guy who hit him on the motorbike never got charged or convicted, or never openly said that he'd done it. He would say it behind kind of closed doors, and for me that was a real moment of wanting to trigger right and justice. So went down a legal pathway, started doing air cadets as well at the same time, which was really good, and thought maybe a aviation and legal background might provide an opportunity. Applied to become a pilot and got through, and went to sign on and saw the contract of how long you had to sign on for, and was like, this is not what I'm doing with the rest of my life. So, was kind of in this juggle of, what do I do? Went to law school, and on the off chance, I was working for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation at the time, doing a cadetship, and just was in the city and just went, I need something different. So joined the Young Farmers Network over here and went away one weekend, probably, within a month, really. And remember driving back down some of this country not too far from here and just went, I just want to farm. Like, I want the opportunity to balance this, environmental work I was doing with the economic and legal work, and just this passion for agriculture and being connected back to sheep, funnily enough, on some country not far from here. Just reminded me of my childhood, and I think just flicked that switch of, this is what our people have been doing for that 200 years, and certainly agriculture beforehand, and opened my eyes to say this is what you should be doing.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people have that click as well. They go away to the cities, or especially a lot of rural, or kids that have grown up rurally, they go to the city, get a big job, and I reckon at about 30 or close to 30, they get this kind of switch that twitches, and they're like, well, actually, this isn't the life I want. I want to go back to how I grew up and have that for my family as well, which is pretty cool. That I guess that just shows that it runs deep through everyone having that beautiful upbringing. You're very proud of your roots as well. What makes you the most proud to be Aboriginal or from your mob?
There's a lot, I think, but for me, I think fundamentally, because our history is so well recorded and the archives from this place are captured, because the Australian Agricultural Company was a publicly listed company 200 years ago. It was the first £1 million capex raise in 1824. So, it was a big deal, and it's the first time in which agriculture, as it currently looks, for the idea of exporting food from here to send back to England, really happened here. And so for me, there's a lot of unpacking as to what are those elements that come out through that. Like, if that's what our whole agricultural system is based on here in Australia, how do we interweave the Aboriginal story through that to actually develop something that's bigger? I think for me, there's a broader unpacking of story and knowledge that we get when we start thinking about agriculture being on this country for 65,000 years rather than just 200. And actually that tandemism of working together through time provides a lot of opportunity through that. So for me, most proud of that, proud that balance has been one that I think my family have thought about a lot through different times. And really, I think just hopeful that we get the opportunity to keep doing that for the next 60-odd thousand years.
That's awesome. I love that. So for those that probably don't know what agriculture used to look like in Australia, probably pre that company being established, what would, I guess, the typical farming structural system look like if there even was one?
Yeah, I think it varies a lot across Australia. So there's 260 different nations, at least 260 different nations here, all of which have their own very different experiences and different agricultural systems, really. That real localized approach certainly happened right across the country. And I think it's interesting as we kind of think about what agriculture is going to look like in the future, and we start talking about localized economies and local solutions, we look back and go, actually, we had that all along. should have learned from that. But we know Worimi people here, we're a people kind of in transition. So we would move from the high country not too far from here when natural indicators started showing us that it was time to move back towards the ocean. We would transition across some of this country and different parts of that based on the movement of a hairy worm, almost like a caterpillar, but quite hairy. And as they would start kind of coming together, that was our indication that it was time to move back towards the coast. So we would wait for that, and then just use natural markers or indicators to indicate when fishing was right. So certain trees coming out in bloom meant that was time for fishing. When they started dying, there was fishing. You fish for something else. So quite a different, natural based or natural indicator based agricultural system here. Obviously, we had a whole heap of kangaroos and emus as well, and that's certainly something that we know that has been lost from this country. Is the emu that we don't see any here anymore, but had a very kind of different relationship with how we nurtured and looked after country. And we know, I think importantly, that there was a form of agricultural system, that this wasn't just by chance that the last 60 or 1,000 years we just kicked around this country and kill whatever, and we're able to feast off different animals, and we're just doing it ad hoc and really lucky by sustaining a population. Like it was actually really quite rigid in some ways in terms of that relationship with nature and knowing when to do things. But also we know mob have been chipping away at soil for a long period of time and planting different species over time to help rest country and also help preserve and create crops as well.
That's awesome. And so with it, I guess it being rather localised to each nation, did they do a bit of trading between each other as well?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's like a full system.
Yeah, and now we know that the economy here was so alive because we can trace where some of those tradings have happened, where you get different artifacts from this coastal region up into the desert regions and right across Australia. So that trading was happening quite a lot. And we also know the responsibilities between tribes was really broad scale. So we have a storyline here, or south of Worimi, down in Newcastle, that relates to things that are happening up in Queensland, for instance, up in the northern parts of Queensland. So that relationship between landscape and people through that natural storyline is really important and kind of tells that interconnectionness of not only trade and yarn, but also the celebration, I think, of culture and what that means, I guess, across nations.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, I find it quite amusing that there's almost this somewhat push to localising our food systems and telling our stories. So how we interact with our landscapes, and we're almost flipping back to that, which was already done, and it's not a new concept, but it's funny that we went so far away from it, and our natural is to go back to our lineage and do the things that were done for so long in all parts of the world. It's pretty cool to see. I think we've still a long way to go, but it's going to be very interesting to see what comes of this.
Yeah, definitely. And I often say, there's this, like, if you had a library that had all the information of what the last 60 or 1,000 years could tell you, just sitting there, you would think turning back to that, particularly in terms of agriculture, so land based and so climate based, you think you would turn back to that 60,000-year-old history book and kind of try and draw out the insights and yarns that are important. So that's kind of sitting here. Obviously, we need to create relationships, agriculture and Indigenous people, and really form those bases. But you have that 60 or 1,000 years of knowledge just sitting there, being used by Indigenous people on their landscapes, but could actually have that broader application to agriculture. It makes sense to create those relationships and really form those yarns to be able to unlock that.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like, even when you see farmers now, they have natural indicators on their farm for when the seasons change. So something will go into bloom, and it'll be the same indicators that have been used for X amount of years. So it's like almost shortcutting all that learning for a lot of people that can be had. And I just don't get why we aren't more open to sharing this information between people, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be successful together, not segregating. And if we just all think the same, we're also not going to achieve and push forward. So you're currently writing a book. Is this a lot of what you're going to pull together?
Yeah, so the book is called Australia's Agricultural Identity and Aboriginal Yarn, and really talks about the process in which agriculture forms our national identity here in Australia. I think we use a lot of the same rhetoric as what our Kiwi brothers and sisters use, that, off the sheep's back, and, the joys of our regional economies. And, that's certainly how I grew up thinking about agriculture, in this kind of flare-esque of what ag could be like. And, all those old stories of, we had bushrangers and agricultural pioneers and greats over here. And I think it's interesting how we reflect on that, given we're 200 odd years on now, in kind of a general sense, and think about what that means going forward. So the story and the book, I guess, is really trying to unpack that, and what are the Aboriginal yarns and stories behind that, which might be able to connect in and really open up that conversation to be broader, of what does that crossover of knowledge and application look like, and how do we share those stories going forward.
That's awesome. That sounds like it's going to be a very interesting book. Is storytelling almost part of who you are because of the way you brought up? Because I feel like in Indigenous cultures, storytelling plays such a key role in who you are and sharing that knowledge intergenerationally. And I don't feel like all cultures embrace that.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I mean, probably as a kid, you grew up hearing stories and had some appreciation for them, but not as much as what happens when you get a bit older. And, certainly I think hearing those stories and being able to unpack some of those yarns in your mind is really helpful. So often at times I'm curious as to how the story is told rather than the actual story, because I think there's a lot to unpack from that. There's a lot to really understand through what parts of the story are told in what sequence. So I think storytelling is certainly a big part of my life, and how we think about those connections, but also equally as important as the story is the way in which it's told, and how it's told, and who it's told by, and what are those little elements. And they're the bits I find gold and gems in.
Yeah, I love that there's this saying that when you see someone speak, or someone who's really good speaking, you don't particularly remember what they say. It's how they make you feel, or how you can see yourself in that story. Do you think that's a key part of it all?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of the relationship we have with our elders here is them instructing us around certain parts that they think we need to hear at a certain time. So you might hear the same story 3 or 4 times, but it might be told differently, or there might be an element left out, or an element that's added, because that's what somebody sees in you that you need to unpack from that. So I think it's so important how we frame those parts of the stories, and how we draw out those bits here and there when we need them.
Absolutely. And how do you think, like, as farmers, we're being told increasingly to tell our story. So how do we get good at doing that, do you think?
I think there's a lot of really great stories we need to unpack as farmers. So we have such a interesting history, and it's good and bad, and there's a lot to unpack through that. But actually, the way in which we connect to that story, I think we almost get there. There's this sense of pride that comes out. You hear farmers talk about how many generations they've been farming for, or how many generations they've been on the same land, and that's important. I think we need to draw on that. We also need to unpack, I think a few yarns along the way around what that looks like. But this agricultural story from that to where we are now is really important, and there's a lot of insights and perspectives I think that we gain through that. The ability to sit down as farmers and really plan effectively those stories, and make sure that we're telling them in the right way, that we're doing it proactively rather than reactively, because I think often at times in the ag sector we wait for a moment of hesitation, and a moment of when things aren't going so right. I'm like, oh yeah, we've got all these stories, actually let's tell you the good news story, where I think actually we've got those all along. We just need to start telling them proactively and positively from the start, and almost we need to start investing in them more and really valuing the leadership. I think as a sector, for me, there's a real risk that we need to really unpack leadership, and what does that mean. And through that is also the storytelling and communication. So we need to get a lot better at having really strong, staunch leadership, and not leadership in terms of calling people out and attacking people, which I think ag has fallen into because of some of the situations agriculture's been placed in, but actually doing it really proactively and bringing people on that bigger journey, as you said, being really clear around these are our values, these are our principles. How do we actually get a whole movement of people, particularly farmers, but also the broader public who are consuming our goods a lot, through that kind of journey together, and actually have people look to agriculture as a space of where leadership is really strong, and that storytelling throughout that is really bought into, so that people can see themselves in that picture and how they can contribute to where we want agriculture to be in the future.
I reckon you've nailed that right there. Like, leadership is I see a lot of leadership even in New Zealand is almost the same people going around all the big companies, and there's not a lot of blooding of young people getting the opportunity to have a crack and show that leadership. But also, it's probably been the same in Australia. Everyone used to have a family member that was on a farm or connected to a farm in some way, and now that isn't. So people don't really understand what's happening. So how do we understand how crucial the farmer is to them and all the good things they're doing? It might not be all positive. You still got to understand how your food is made and how it gets to you, and then you can buy based on that as well. So I think, leadership and someone who can actually articulate the story and make people feel all involved, like we are all part of this, and not actually coming back from that, I guess, that fear of being attacked. Like, I think a lot of farmers feel that, and the industry do feel that we're being attacked from on all fronts currently, and that's why you're only seeing the good news stories rolling out in response to that. But there's very few people out there frontlining it and going, this is what I do, this is what I bring to the table, this is why I do it. And I think that's the biggest opportunity for a lot of our farmers, actually.
Yeah, and it's not to, I have some hesitation myself, noting this, but it needs to be done in a way that's good, positive, proactive leadership, not beating your chest saying, look at all this great stuff we're doing. It actually, it needs a lot of time and consideration and to be really built up so that we actually have really strong, good foundational leadership that then builds that out. It can't be, it shouldn't be seen as us against them. It shouldn't be seen as, this fear mongering of we need to get on the right foot before somebody tries to call out some of our behavior, and kind of get some wins on the ground, I guess. It's actually really doing it because it's the right thing to do, doing it because we're passionate about it, and doing it because we see the value in what that unpacks in terms of the relationship building with consumers. Yeah,
definitely. And that's not a short-term project to be working on. That takes a long time. And it's like earning that trust from the consumer and everyone. And it's just, I think the most important thing is that inclusivity of it all. Like, we're all working together towards the same goals. And it's how does our piece of the puzzle fit into all these wider issues that we are so concerned about as a society. So, no, I think you're pretty spot on there.
I can just add, I think it's funny that I've been involved in conversations around the fear or the risk of agricultural social license for about 10 years. And we're still having the same conversation 10 years later. And the solutions are still the same. It's still, how do we create trust with consumers? How do we tell the story? So I think any opportunity we get to actually start doing the positive, proactive work on that space, rather than just having the same, we're worried about a social license conversation, is just really needed. And we can't keep thinking that we're just going to have this, we're going to wake up one morning and social license is going to be perfect. We actually need to start doing the work on it now.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's just a constant work on, and you get better at it over time as well. And things change, and they change incredibly quickly at the moment with the way that technology and everyone is connected now. So we're both on this Create program at the moment. How are you finding it from your experience?
Yeah, I've found Create pretty remarkable, actually. I think it's so awesome to be with a cohort of, I think there's 24 of us from across the world, all leaning into these conversations and thinking about what does regen ag look like across the world, really, to be honest, and really unpacking the elements of that we all see as part of that bigger picture. So I found it really great, just that connection piece around how we have those yarns, what the elements are across the world that we all can kind of build upon, and really think about what that future is going to look like based on those principles and those yarns.
Yeah, I think the fact that there's so many of us from around the world is also quite interesting. You see all the different perspectives, but also the same issues across everywhere. And yeah, I think the greatest thing about it is the range of people in it and the caliber of people in it is, I'm just continually grateful to be actually a part of this program, because I'm actually learning so much from the people and learning about myself. So what do you think your biggest learning so far is? We're not even halfway, but...
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot. I think there's been some real practical elements. Obviously, we're dived into calcium and phosphorus last week, and that was awesome, just some of those real practical learnings. But I think there's some broader perspectives and changes as well that have been really powerful. Certainly that personal development aspect of unpacking integrity and authenticity and really building on that has been really helpful and really good in terms of timing. I think for me, just the journey I'm on as well. But fundamentally, I really think just the opportunity to be in a room with 20 really incredible people, and just I always have this thought that you get good people in the room and good things will happen, and you can sense that, right? Like the week we spent in Montana, I think we could have spent 6 months there and unpacked some really cool stuff. But I think we started unpacking some really great stuff, and I'm looking forward to seeing that journey. So obviously we've got a lot more classwork to still do and a lot more interactions and training. But I'm looking forward to the celebration in a few months' time. And then also then beyond that, like what are the long-term things that happen because of that training and that course?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I feel that first week everyone turned up and actually showed up, which made it quite a great start. And I think that set the bar pretty high for the rest of it. And like you, I'm very interested to see how everyone develops for the rest of their life, because I feel like I will keep in touch with these people for a very long time. And the opportunities to work together on things will be pretty awesome too. Yeah. So at the end of it, where do you think you'll end up? Like, what do you think you'll come out the backside of it?
Yeah, there's probably a few things that are unfolding at the same time. So obviously, the PhD in the book, are kind of exciting, and I'm really interested in what those journeys will happen as well. But for me, it creates this opportunity to really think about what do Indigenous land-based agricultural systems look like into the future. So in Australia, we know about 60% of Australia's landmass is either owned or has native title rights by Indigenous groups. Most of that is where it's farmed is currently being done by non-Indigenous people, and none, if any, of the value that is being kind of developed as part of that agricultural enterprises on land is actually going back to Aboriginal people on the ground. So there's some challenges with that relationship between ag and Indigenous people still today. But we know that given that large land holding, and our federal government here has a commitment to try and increase that by another 15% under the Closing the Gap, which is our national system here on what does improving Indigenous wellbeing and health look like. One of those is access to land. So effectively, with that 15% commitment, we could be in a state by 2030 that Indigenous land ownership or Indigenous legal rights across this landscape could span maybe 3/4 of Australia's landmass, which is massive. And even if we don't get to 3/4, I think 60% is a really good place to start. And we know agriculture provides a lot of opportunities, and a lot of that land will be needed for agricultural production here in Australia to feed both here but also internationally through export markets. So the opportunity for Create is really to unpack what do those future agricultural systems need to look like in terms of bettering not just our ag commodities, but also just like in terms of landscapes. How do we help protect and preserve lands? How do we have healthy communities as a result of that? How do we also have healthy people who are consuming the foods and having access to safe, healthy, affordable, nutritious food in their local communities, and really build that kind of real, almost like going back to the past, like that real localized community that's based around agriculture. How do we redevelop some of that while making sure our agricultural systems are strong and are working well with nature and our environment to really then bolster what that looks like and that connection back to landscape into the future as well. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of Create, really that activation of and being able to test and showcase what that work looks like so that we can help communities across Australia and across the world really help define that for themselves into the future as well.
That's awesome. That's a massive goal. And I had no idea that it was up to 60% already. That's incredible. That's also such a great opportunity. What do you think is the low-hanging fruit to try and get some wins on the board there, I guess, to get things moving in the right direction? Because I think based on the 60 years of history, you've got the knowledge there. It's how do we formulate that into a system that in the current form so that it can benefit and create better communities that are healthy and profitable, and also like a system or a future pathway for Indigenous people to actually go into agriculture, and they choose to do it because there's so much opportunity there.
Yeah, there's a lot of paths through that conversation. So some things we're currently doing. One is where I'm studying is getting young Indigenous kids to think about agricultural careers and providing scholarships to university. We know those programs are working because up until recently, less than 5, like the number 5, Indigenous agricultural graduates were graduating from university. So that's Indigenous kids with ag degrees across all parts of Australia. From every university in Australia, just 5 kids were coming out. So there's a massive gap there between what we think the future demand will be and how many people are currently going through the ag sector. Through the scholarships, we've been able to almost triple that in about 4 or 5 years. So it's not because Indigenous people don't want to go to university to study agriculture, it's access. So we're, I think, really excited by some of those findings and some of those results. So that's a pretty quick and easy win. If I'm really honest, like just having companies invest in scholarships is a pretty easy one. The other parts that I think we're working on now is creating an Indigenous Research and Development Corporation. So we have a whole suite of different what are known as RDCs, Research and Development Corporations here, that basically back all the industry research and the agricultural lobbying here in Australia. So the actual research phase gets about $2.3 billion per year from government and producer levies. We know Indigenous people are contributing to those, so we're just asking for our fair share of those. And based on the procurement and populations, we'd like to see about 3.5% of that comes from an Indigenous Research and Development Corporation every year, about $70 million. To really fund Indigenous-led and self-determined research. And we think that'll provide a lot of opportunities for the kids that are going through university to then come out and then go on and do agricultural research across our communities and, really be able to unpack and relook at some of those opportunities really locally based. And I think there's another part that needs looking at some stage, which is the actual lobbying and producer support. So in America, for instance, they have the Intertribal Agricultural Council, which provides support for Indian producers right on the ground, and then also provides that advocacy body into government and into national agricultural policy. And we don't have anything like that yet. So I'm certainly creating something like that here in Australia that can support young kids who are showing cattle, to young kids going to university, to producers on the ground who are doing awesome work and who are looking at, expanding their agricultural knowledge or their training, or getting access to that research and development opportunities that hopefully the RDC will create, but then also doing the agricultural policy work. All of those kind of different bits and pieces are all bits that need to be built out in the system that hopefully will happen kind of in conjunction with Create, to then be able to provide those pathways as well for Aboriginal people to look at those in the future.
That's awesome. You're doing some really great work. Like, it's pretty incredible, the sort of stuff you're doing. And you should be really proud of the work you're doing. It's pretty cool. And the outcomes that you'll have for all Australians, it's not just the Aboriginals, would be incredible as well. Like, if we can get this up and rolling and doing the things that you'd like to do, I guess it just starts that ball rolling, and it's that next 60,000 years of agriculture sorted almost, or still there.
Well, at least embedded, right? So I think just being able to reshift those conversations at least provides that perspective that we don't have now, and that we've been losing or haven't been as prominent in the last 200 years. So where we can rebuild some of the structural systems to then create those opportunities. I mean, hopefully, realistically, we get to a stage where these organizations aren't needed because they're so embedded into the other organizations that it's just common practice. But without that that's not going to happen overnight. It hasn't happened in the last 200 years. So we need to kind of take stock of where we are now, think about what that pathway would be, and start building those processes out and those organizations to then hopefully have a phase out date on the backside, because we know that connection to land and that massive landscape that Indigenous people have rights over here in Australia will hopefully mean that those conversations will just become commonplace.
Absolutely, and that's the ultimate goal, really, isn't it? We are one people, and while these services are needed now, eventually, if they're not needed, then that means we were successful in what we were trying to achieve, which would be awesome to be able to say that when you're on your deathbed that you had a hand in that. Would be pretty cool, I reckon.
Yeah. Well, at least started some of the conversations, I hope. I think with Indigenous groups in Australia, particularly, but if not around the world, have been fairly active in conversations around, health and education, areas where they've needed to be, but agriculture seems to be an area that hasn't been as prevalent. So where we can start building those conversations, I think that's really important and powerful, given that connection to land and rethinking what landscape should look like.
Yeah, and there's opportunity between groups around the world to share what they're doing in that space as well, which would be pretty cool. And you can share research between each other and what's working and what's not. And that's a huge opportunity in itself as well. Yeah, so if someone wants to connect with you or follow along your work, where's the best way to get in touch with you?
Pretty much anywhere, really. I think all the socials, just Gilbert Joshua M is my handle across all of those. So whether that be Instagram or LinkedIn, Facebook, probably the main ones. And I think, I always say this, but I'm always open for a yarn or a conversation. And I, have been really lucky by offering that, have been able to speak to some really cool people, some kids who are studying their HSC who are interested in climate change or agriculture, to some really, incredible kind of people throughout that network. So I really am open to those conversations and do always try and make time in my diary to have those yarns. So I really mean that. If you're interested, feel free to reach out.
That's awesome. That's a great thing to be doing. It's just giving back a bit of time and hearing what other people's thoughts are as well, because you can pick up some great knowledge from anyone, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I normally round up my podcast with a few quick-fire questions here at the end. So the first one is, what's one thing that you would change about the agricultural industry?
One thing.
I
think diversity in its broader sense. So how do we have diversity of people, diversity of landscapes, diversity of commodities and production styles, and diversity of economic models that underpin all that? I think there's a lot to really unpack around thinking about agricultural systems through a diverse lens.
I like that. It's a very good response. And it helps to fix a lot of the issues that we have currently. Diversity builds so much resilience into the agricultural system. So if you're looking back at your younger self, what's one piece of advice you'd give?
I probably don't have a lot, to be honest. I think for me, this journey's been full of ups and downs for a reason, and the difficult times have really made me rethink the better times and have made me learn a lot. So almost trust the process, what's coming will be fine, and just keep riding it, because I think I'm pretty happy with where things are at. There's certainly some things that I need to work on and things I can improve on, but things are pretty good. And I think just trusting that process and trusting that the environment and this landscape will look after us will kind of give up the goods.
I love that. And what's something that excites you at the moment?
There's a lot. I think maybe across all the things I do, I think the diversity of the conversations I get to have is pretty amazing. So in the last week, I've had conversations around everything from ag tech and innovation to just a range of different things. Obviously, we had a great call last week, and a range of different things came out of that, to environmental legislation here in Australia and maybe the future around some of that. So I think that there's quite a lot there. My passion project is getting young kids involved in agriculture, though. And I was telling you a bit earlier about our Beef Week competition we run here, which gets about 400, and hopefully we'll get 500 school kids next year. And for me, that's an awesome way of giving back to the next generation of young kids who are obviously passionate about agriculture. They're waking up at 4:00 to clip cows and to wash them and blow them. So supporting that that interest and that passion for me is really exciting, and hoping to build pathways for those kids in the ag sector is really cool. So there's a lot, but I think that's what I keep coming back to as a way that's really obvious in its kind of propensity to really support the next generation of people in agriculture.
That is very exciting, and who knows just how many of those kids that are showing those cattle, how much of a market will leave on them for the rest of their life. That could be the thing that makes them stay in agriculture or get back to it one day if they ever leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
And finally, what is a force of nature to you? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think for me it's people. Like it's the relationship between different people and nature, I guess. I'm playing on the name, but the environment, all coming together to get the best out of each other. So I think where we can build that real purposeful connection across people, across pathways, and do that with the landscape, nature, and agriculture in mind, I think we're going to get more and more really great outcomes that we can really celebrate. So that snowballing or the cascading of all those different pieces, those bits of the jigsaw puzzle, that I like to call them, that we can keep playing around and building those out. I think we'll all have good results one day, and we just need to keep doing the groundwork to keep building the next piece and the next piece.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, people are the backbone of it all. And if we all come together, we can create a massive force of change. So I love that. Thank you very much for your time today, Josh. It's been great to see you and have a chat to you again and learn a bit more about what makes you tick. So I really appreciate your time today.
No, pleasure's all mine, mate, and keep it up. I think it's great to have podcasts like this to really showcase what that future state should be, and getting different people's perspectives and ideas on how we all work together to build that. So thanks for creating this space and the opportunity to do that.
No problem, mate.